Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Play, Pause, Rewind. This is our 99th episode, take two, due to bad internet connection. But we're back again. Niles, how have you been the last couple weeks?
Yay! I've been good. It's been a good little bit of travel. We went to the Great Sand Dunes National Park here in Colorado. Definitely recommend checking that out. It's a great experience, and you feel like you're on Arrakis when you're walking around out there. It's pretty awesome. Um,
Uh-huh.
but Exactly. Yeah, the whole time I was just making Dune references, and my partner's like, she hasn't seen Dune, so she was asking questions the whole time, like, is that a place in Dune? And I was showing her the sand walk and everything.
Mm.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's been good, and I'm excited for Thanksgiving. How have you been, Dylan?
Oh, doing okay. Last couple months have been a bit of a shit show. In the first round of this recording, I did my whole PC issue saga, but fuck, I don't want to do it again. Basically, I went to the PC three times in 3 days. Kept getting delayed. Shit kept getting fucked up. But my computer is back. It's sitting right here. I got it back about an hour and a half ago. Feels great. Um,
Yay!
but yeah, other than that, just watched some TV, some movies. Excited for Thanksgiving. Company holiday party coming up. That'll be fun. But enough about
Mm.
me. Let's talk about the thing we're talking about this week, which is not the penguin, because we fucking lied to you. We told you we were going to talk about the penguin, but we're not. We're going to do it next time, probably. What are we talking about this week?
Sorry, everyone. This week we're talking about Gladiator II, the sequel to Ridley Scott's 2000 film Gladiator. It is set nearly 2 decades after the original, and Gladiator II follows the story of Lucius, the son of Maximus and Lucilia Aurelius. As an adult, Lucius's home in Numidia is conquered by the Romans, and he is then forced to become a gladiator and partake in the games in the Colosseum. And chaos
Yes.
and all kinds of fun things ensue. Lions and tigers and bears and rhinos, oh my.
Oh my. That's connected to a different movie that came out this week. Um,
Yeah, and it's directed by Ridley Scott, written by David Scarpia, Peter Craig, and David Franzoni, and it stars Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, Connie Nielsen, Joseph Quinn, Fred Heckinger, and many, many others. Dylan, what are your initial thoughts on Gladiator 2?
I just want to point out that in both takes of this recording, you called Paul Mescal Pez on accident before getting his name right.
The
um,
dyslexia is real today.
yeah. But yeah, Gladiator 2, I have to say, I was pretty underwhelmed with this.
Mm,
Really disappointed. Like, I love the first Gladiator. It's fucking amazing movie. I rewatched it early last week, which probably did a disservice to this movie. But like, Gladiator 2 looks great. It's very well made, but I never found myself emotionally invested in much of anything. I will say Denzel Washington is a clear standout performance here, and he carries pretty much
mm-hmm,
every he's in by a mile. His character is also the most interesting in the film. The standout sequence for me was definitely that boat battle in the Colosseum. They did do naval warfare sometimes in the Colosseum, and that is one of the most unique sequences in the film compared to the first one. But I
mm-hmm,
also enjoyed getting to see more scenes showcasing the social lives of the Roman populace. In general, I found this stuff more engaging than anything to do with the actual gladiatorial combat. It was something new
mm-hmm.
we didn't get as much of in the first one, and I liked that. But overall, this story just didn't really connect with me much, and the movie to me feels like it was made primarily because Ridley Scott's last few films have not been huge box office hits, and the only way he was going to get the financing to make a film of this scale was to go back to an existing property that had already been proven successful. But Niles, what about you? What do you think? Non spoilers for Gladiator 2.
Yeah, I think I'm in a little bit of a similar boat as you. I did enjoy this when we were
Mm-hmm.
watching it, and because I think that there are some good things in this movie. Like you said, it's very competently made. I really do like the depictions of life in ancient Rome. The environments, they really feel lived in and
Mm-hmm.
real and raw and graphic. And uh, it makes me want to play Rome Total War again. Go
Mm-hmm.
back and play that old PC game. But there's great action sequences. There's great creativity in the games. Like there's great creativity in the original movie, but there's also a lot here too.
Mm-hmm.
And the ineptitude and incompetence of the twin emperors is fun to watch. And I agree. I really like Denzel Washington's character, and I like the um, uh, escalating emotional dynamics between our protagonist Lucius and his mother and the General Acacius as well. But all that being said, I don't think that we really needed this sequel at all because the original
Mm-hmm.
movie is, like you said, it's so well done. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, too. I think I've seen it half a dozen times.
Yep.
And it's really like lightning in a bottle, and it's impossible to recapture that. It's so challenging. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
even know like how you would approach that task from like a creative standpoint. But it I like going back to this Roman world and exploring a new facet of it. But it wasn't as good as the first one, and I don't think it really rises to the occasion in that
Mm-hmm.
regard. And I think it's because it's too tied to the original. In my opinion, I think the plot of this movie, since it's so connected to the original, I think it's a hindrance to it, and it was the wrong decision to make. I think the movie should have been a gladiator film that's like set towards the collapse of Rome, like towards the collapse of the entire empire.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that would have given the story uh, a new original story, a new original perspective, but it would also give it the weight to like stand on its own two feet, give it the ability or the opportunity to do that, and not lean
Yep.
so much on the legacy of the original film. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that's challenging to set it towards the collapse of the Roman Empire because it didn't just happen in a day. It happened over the span of hundreds of years. There were a lot of things that took place. It was a gradual
Mm-hmm.
process, but I think it could have been cool personally to see how the empire changed over time and like how it's different from the first one to this
Yeah.
one, like how drastically different Rome is. And it could have been cool to see the gladiators maybe play a role in the collapse somehow. Maybe they played
Mm-hmm.
a role in the sacking of Rome or the first sacking of Rome or something like that. I don't know. I think that could have been a unique perspective to see.
Yep. Yeah, I think the problem part of the problem with it being so close in proximity is that like it follows the legacy sequel formula too much.
Mm,
And
hmm
that is a big Achilles heel for this movie is how formulaic it is, and in a Gladiator sequel probably didn't need to be like that. Probably shouldn't have been like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it looks great.
Hmm.
There's a lot of scenes that like you look at it and you're like, that looks exactly like the original, and I like some of those aesthetics, and I really liked the opening sequence, like the credit sequence too. It just
Hmm.
was like all paintings of the original, and I thought that was really cool and creative. So that
Yeah.
was neat, and I was also surprised to see. A former host of the Great British Bake Off, Matt Lucas, in this film too. He
Hmm.
is the master of ceremonies, the guy with the bald head. I mean, there's a lot of bald people in this movie, but he's that guy who's standing there and being like, in this corner, here comes the gladiator," kind
Yeah,
of
he's like the
vibe. That's
announcer, right?
yeah. And so shout out to Matt Lucas. Nice to see you in a Ridley Scott film. The
Hmm.
last place I would have expected to see him.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that we also need to mention the Glicked thing with
Hmm.
cinema here because Gladiator and Wicked are being released here on the same weekend, similar to the Barbenheimer event from what was that, like 2 years ago at this point,
Yeah.
of
It was a little
Barbie
while
and
ago.
Oppenheimer, or maybe that was last summer. I can't entirely remember, but it's
Yeah.
it's interesting that they're marketing this so hard.
Yeah, they're trying to, but it's like Barbenheimer. The thing about it was kind of organic, and it was fan made, and then the movies on top of that were both super good, and people got excited to see both of them. And you can't recreate that. It was lightning in a bottle. Every attempt subsequently to recreate it has come off as embarrassing to me. Like I remember, you remember Saw Patrol, when a Saw movie and the movie for babies Paw Patrol came out on the same weekend, and some people were like, "It's Saw Patrol." It's like, no, man, no one's gonna fucking do that. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I'm not seeing both of those movies on the same weekend. You can't force me.
Yeah, unless you're taking a toddler to a Saw movie, which is not cool. Don't do that to them. But
Yeah.
that's time that's acceptably funny. But
It's like that meme online where it's like it's a bunch of natural people just being like, "Hey, look at this meme," and it's like a pineapple or whatever, and everyone's celebrating, they're having fun with it, and then a corporation comes in and takes it and puts it on their
yes.
head, and they're like,
Uh-huh.
"Now I'm part of the fun," and everyone's
Uh-huh.
like, "No, it's you ruined it," and that's
yeah.
that's kind of what's happening, I think, with Glicked.
Yes, it is. It's exactly like that. But all right. Last thing on non spoilers, I want to agree with you. Like the production design in this movie is great. The effects are great. Everything looks nice. I loved them walking around in like Roman exteriors and going into these buildings. Just technology wise, more able to do that than we were in 2000. So they really do lean on that, and it looks great. It's just the story itself is the weakest link of this movie. And to talk about that in depth, I think we need to go into spoilers. So you want to do a quick
I
recap
agree.
for us?
Yes, let's move on in. So, to recap at this point, Acacius and Lucilla attempt a coup to save Lucius and overthrow the corrupt twin emperors. But Denzel Washington's character, Macrinus, exposes the coup, which leads to the deaths of Acacius and Lucilia. Macrinus also seizes on this opportunity the chaos that ensues from these deaths to kill both the emperors and attempt to then become the ruler of the Roman Empire. Lucius leads a gladiator uprising, basically, and fights Macrinus to the death. And the movie ends on a hopeful note that Rome is going to be restored to Marcus Aurelius's dream.
Yeah.
Does that recap it?
Yeah, more except for like the main crux that we're supposed to follow for a while too is like Lucius is angry at Acacius and wants to kill him because they were on opposite sides of a battle at the start, and Lucius's wife is killed on Acacius's orders. So it's like
Right.
I think already that could be very interesting, right? But it just isn't as it just doesn't have as much fire to it as the revenge plot in the first one, where Maximus is like going for Commodus, right? Because Commodus is like so fucking horrible, and he kills and it's not in a battle in that one. Remember, he kills Marcus Aurelius, and then he has Maximus's wife and child burned to death, as murder. And it's like there's we'll talk about it in a second, but it's like there's nothing that matches up with like my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, like former general, blah blah blah, like husband to a murdered wife, father to a murdered son, and I will have my vengeance. It's like that
so good.
Like that makes your blood like pump. There's nothing like
Chills.
that movie. Yeah. And I also think before we get into that, I think just we start Lucius's story here via flashbacks. It's like right after Maximus's death, his mom is like, "Oh, it's not safe anymore. You got to go on the run right now." And I don't usually like the criticism where like, "Oh, it retroactively like affects the previous movie," and I don't like it as much because of that. But it's like it kind of feels weird in this one to me. Maximus does all this stuff and makes this really noble sacrifice, and everybody is kind of like, we're gonna make Rome a republic now, and we're gonna fulfill the vision that Marcus Aurelius sent Maximus to achieve. And it's like, actually, no, none of that is happening at all. It's not even like an attempt and then we failed. It's just immediately, oh, you're the Emperor's heir. You're in danger. You got to go. Bye. It just felt very
Mm-hmm.
contrived and weird. But I think the biggest problem with this movie for me is it just parts of it feel like imitation and it feels hollow. And while I
Mm.
acknowledge comparing a film to Gladiator in general is pretty unfair, this is its sequel. So it's more
Yeah.
fair here. And I think this just pales in comparison in every regard to the original. Like, one example, the
Mm-hmm.
gladiators themselves, right? In Gladiator, we follow Maximus, obviously, but he spends a lot of time hanging out with Damon Hansu's character and that German guy, and also Proximo, who is the
Yeah.
guy who owns them all, and he develops like, bonds with them throughout the film. They're not
Mm-hmm.
super fleshed out characters, but the movie takes the time needed to make you like them and to show how their loyalty to Maximus grows. So by the time like shit hits the fan, you are given enough to understand why they're all willing to put their lives on the line and in most cases die to help Maximus at the end, right?
Yeah.
This one, they're a bunch of gladiators. They talk sometimes, but um, they just I guess like Lucius and they kind of help him out at the end.
Yeah, you're so right because yeah, they all just like decide suddenly like, "Oh, he's our leader." Like cuz
Hmm.
he helped us survive in the ring basically and he's kind of standing up for us and it's like, "But he's not like a general or something like that or like a former warrior that's like been like taken into as a prisoner and then turned
Hmm.
slave." And that's kind of like I think what partially inspires a lot of people in the original is that it's like he was this hero for the
Yeah.
republic, this well-known hero, and now he's a gladiator. And
Hmm.
it so clearly is like a juxtaposition between him and Commodus. Like it's
Right.
so clear that he is a
Hmm.
good guy for like
Yeah.
the working class. And in this one, it's like, yeah, there he is. He's Lucius, and he's got Maximus's name or whatever.
Uh
And
huh.
not everyone knows that, but they're like, they all
Right.
just follow him.
Yeah, like in Gladiator, Maximus inspires everyone because he defies the Emperor in the arena.
Yes.
In front of he turns
Yeah.
back to him, and there's a story, like in a history that everyone gets behind, and they grow to like him. And Lucius is just there isn't a comparable moment because the rivalry he has is just with like the noble general who is regretful in his actions, and there's really no moment like this. um and another thing too is that I found very odd about this one, and maybe it was just they wanted to figure out ways they could do something a little bit different than the original, and I like that, but there are so many sections of this film that are just second attempts at things the main characters of the first film were planning to do that didn't work out. Like the entire
Mm-hmm.
conspiracy to overthrow the emperors is just the conspiracy from the first one to overthrow Commodus by,
Yeah.
go get the noble general's army that's stationed not that far away and bring them in. And in Gladiator, obviously the plan is foiled. And in this one, it is too, but then they kind of make it work anyway. And so it's just like okay, they're just doing it again, but successfully this time because it was unsuccessful the first one, and it just feels like a weird remix in some ways of the first
Mm-hmm.
film.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't feel right. It feels like we're missing something of like this big emotional push to put your weight behind the
Hmm.
protagonist and the actions there. And yeah, I think like it's there could have been something better there.
Yeah.
And a part of me like wonders if it's like going back to what I said in non spoilers, like what if it was just like a slave who becomes a gladiator who's like no affiliation at all. Like yes, it can
Hmm.
take place maybe 10 decade or two after Maximus, but like someone who's actually like taken into slavery and like we get to know his like town and everything a little bit more in detail, his
Yeah.
people. It feels like that would be a little bit more earned, like more of a Spartacus moment
Hmm.
of like,
Yeah.
no, I'm leading this slave revolt against you guys.
Yeah. I agree. It could have been more distinct or more tied in, but it feels like there's this weird middle ground. And also, I think part of the problem is just there is like the dramatic fire of the first one is that revenge, right? And it's like we want
Mm-hmm.
Maximus to get his revenge. In this one, I think they're trying something more complicated because we don't want Lucius to get his revenge necessarily because the guy he wants revenge against is a decent man trying to do the right thing. And I respect the attempt to make it more complicated, but I think it just doesn't end up working as well because you're
Yeah.
confused about what you should be rooting for. One thing I do want to touch on really
Agreed.
quickly is May Kalamaui. She
Mm.
was we probably best know her on this show as Layla in Moon Knight. She's the female lead of the Marvel Moon Knight show. At one point,
Right.
she was cast as the female lead of this movie, but I think she only appears as a background character in one or two scenes and has no lines in the theatrical cut at all. I am mentioning this because
Hmm.
she is an Egyptian Palestinian actress, and I'm seeing lots of theories online that she was cut from the movie because she's Palestinian and the producers or the studio or Ridley Scott did not want to deal with the controversy associated with the genocide of Palestinians that is happening right now. And look, maybe that is the case. And I'm not trying to run defense for Ridley Scott here or the studio. I do not care to do that, but I'm also not super comfortable jumping to the conclusion based on the movie we watched. Ridley
Mm-hmm.
Scott movies often have huge sections, sometimes entire storylines cut out for theatrical releases that sometimes find their way back onto director's cuts, often to result in a superior film. So I'm more inclined to believe that she was at one point the female lead, but the storyline she was a part of just got cut because it didn't fit into the main through line of this film as cleanly as they wanted to, rather than it being deliberate because of her ethnicity. Still sucks. I would like to know what her role might have been, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe it is because she's Palestinian, but we don't have the information to make that conclusion, so I don't want to. So, do
Yeah.
you have anything to say about that?
Well, no, I didn't even really know about this until you brought it up to
Mm-hmm.
me, and this is yeah, because I'm not as online, so I didn't realize that she was even involved in this movie
Yeah.
at all. I thought that this was just kind of yeah, just straightforward Gladiator 1 into Gladiator 2, Lucius
Mm-hmm.
son kind of dynamic. I didn't even realize that there was an idea that she could have been the lead of this movie. So, I mean, yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see if we ever learn the truth of it. But yeah, that's a shame that she got cut out because she is a good actress. I really liked her in
Yeah.
Moon Knight. She was really
Yeah,
good in
she
that.
was cool in that. I think the reason I'm leaning towards it not being like a deliberate exclusion to avoid controversy or whatever is like I just it's a whole storyline and it doesn't feel like there's a chunk of the movie missing where a character that she might have been playing would have been significant. She seems like she's in Macronis's entourage or something, and it like whatever her role would have been if it was as big as a female lead, like it would have been a fundamentally different film that we saw. So we'll just have to wait.
Hmm.
Who knows? But let's talk about some historical accuracy or lack thereof for a little while. You want to walk us through some of that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because this was one of the things that really I like to look into and research after
Mm-hmm.
watching some of these historical films. And this was just fascinated me because this is ancient Rome. There's not we don't know everything that happened in Rome,
Yeah.
but we know some things that happened. And there's lots of people who have already pointed out all the inaccuracies far better than I ever can because
Mm-hmm.
they're historians and they know this stuff like the back of their hand. But there are some things that stood out to me, and I'll also say that I don't necessarily think that historical inaccuracy in this film is a bad thing
Yeah.
because this is a modern audience that's watching and consuming this film. And
Mm-hmm.
even if there are some things that are inaccurate, like, oh, they wouldn't have cafes at the time, or like, oh, the printing press wasn't invented for many,
Yeah.
many years. So how is this guy reading this thing in like on paper? It doesn't really make a lot of sense at the time. Um, But, it's like if you're going to get hung up on those historical inaccuracies, you're missing the point of this movie. And
Yeah.
it's about, making it digestible for modern audiences and getting
Right.
people interested in like the value of the movie, the story behind it, or just like the message behind
It's
the movie,
about
what Ridley
vibes
Scott is
too.
trying to tell us.
It's
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
vibes. Like, and Ridley Scott, I think, very famously doesn't give a fuck about historical accuracy. I think he called someone a nerd in an interview for pointing it out to him. And he's just like, I think usually his response is like, okay, I don't care. Shut the fuck up. Move on.
Yeah, exactly. And like, even if there are inaccuracies, they're all based in some truth. And it's honestly stupid to critique the audience on these things, but I would rather watch an over the top naval battle sequence in the Colosseum than one that's boring and limited by the technology of the time period.
Yes.
That's just a fact. I would rather watch that. But yeah, there are some truthful things here, like the emperors. Caracalla, I think that's how you pronounce it. But the two emperors here, and Gaeta, they were real emperors who ruled jointly for a time, but they were not twins. Gaeta was assassinated by his brother, but it's unclear why. And Caracalla, he died out in the field with his troops, and it was likely by one of his own officers who killed him. So they did die, and they were brothers. So that's kind of cool that they were ruling at the same time. And the more that you dive into it, the more it's like co-emperorship was becoming more of a thing over time in ancient Rome too, because their father had one of them co-emperor with him for like maybe 10 years before his death, which is, I think, something new that I learned, and I wanted to share that with everybody.
That's cool.
And then Denzel Washington's character, Macrinus, he did become emperor shortly after those two died. And he was the only emperor, or the only person to become emperor of the empire who had not previously been a senator. He also may have prompted the assassination of Caracalla, but that's unclear. And he also did not serve very long. This is kind of the period of emperors in Rome who would serve for maybe 3-5 years or something like that. Like very short stints of emperors for a very long time.
Yeah. In the movie, he serves for what, like 2 days?
Yeah, exactly. He's just up there for I feel like he was up there for an hour, honestly, the way the movie shows it. He's just up there for an hour, and then he gets killed by Lucius. The daughter of Marcus Aurelius also died before Commodus did, but who cares? Because we're not here to nitpick.
Maximus Decimus Meridius didn't exist in real life as far as we know, so he couldn't have killed Commodus in the arena, because this is a story. Yeah, and I did some research there. He's like this fiction who's an amalgamation of like different real people, like real generals. He was Spartacus, like lots of kind of people merged together. Also, gladiators, they were not only slaves. Like a lot of the gladiators were slaves, but there were also a lot of free men who fought as gladiators for honor and glory and for other reasons too. I also learned that gladiator fights, yes, a lot of them were to the death, but most of the time, it was just until first blood or surrender. It wasn't always like fight to the death, but that's not as dramatic for a movie. Exactly, and that's something that's been pointed out about the first one too, and I do think it's interesting that it makes for a more dramatic sequence that they fight to the death. It's awesome in the movies, but think about it logistically, like gladiators were expensive. They were investments and property for the slave owners who used them. They would not want their property to be killed in their first fight. Gladiators, they were athletes as well. They developed fan bases and stuff like that. So and I think the emperor did the thumb thing in real life. I think that was part of it, and I think that was one of the times when a gladiator would kill when the emperor commanded it at the behest of the crowd. I guess.
That makes sense. And I think the sequences with the animals in this movie are really cool. Like when they're fighting the baboons in the first kind of arena, and then the rhino, like the guy on top of the rhino, that is really cool. Like that's
Yeah.
just a cool action sequence, and I really like that.
Hmm.
There is little to no evidence that gladiators fought animals, though, or
Yeah.
at least animals like these. Like I'm sure that they fought like tigers and the things from the first movie. But
Hmm.
more often than not, if they did have animals fighting, it would be animals fighting other animals, from my
Yeah.
understanding.
And I think also a lot of it was how they're more used in the Colosseum itself in both movies. It's like they weren't to be fought; they were obstacles to make the fight happening more dangerous and interesting. So, like, if
Yes.
gladiators were fighting, they would open up the trap door and boom, a tiger jumps out, and now they have to avoid the tiger while they're fighting each other. That I think that's how the animals were used historically.
Yeah, yeah, and that's how they did it in the first one too. I remember that
Hmm.
those battles.
Yeah.
Um, and we've talked about the naval sequence in this movie, which is honestly one of the coolest parts of the movie. The fact that they
Yeah.
have these ships in there, um, and they did this. They did this in the Colosseum. They did recreate naval battles and these kinds of historical strategies. Like they liked doing this, but it was not to the scale that they depicted. There were no sharks in the water. They couldn't have that much water in the Colosseum. Like it was just impossible, and the ships could
Hmm.
not ram each other, and they couldn't allow a lot of water into the ring. It happened, but yeah, it
Yeah.
was not to this extent. But again, I would much rather watch this in a movie than something that is more
Yes.
historically accurate.
This is not a documentary. We have creative license to make it more epic. But another thing about this, actually, just interesting trivia from memory. Like these naval battles did happen in the Colosseum, but
Hmm.
from what I remember, they happened much earlier in the timeline because um, a big
Mm,
innovation in the Colosseum is something we already see in the first film was the like trapdoors and elevators that came up. They built this whole infrastructure under the arena floor so that it could look like animals and other gladiators just appeared out of nowhere. And
right.
once they built that, the naval battles stopped because think about it, like the water would just flood into the stuff underneath. But
Exactly.
who gives a shit? They didn't do that in the first movie. They did it here, and it's a unique sequence, and it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a and a similar thing with like the newspaper that I referred to earlier. Romans didn't necessarily have a newspaper, but they did have like little message boards in public
Hmm.
spaces where they would have news and records carved into stone. So like people were able to get news and circulate, stories that way, but it
Yeah.
wasn't like there's a gazette every day and it's the news of Rome and here's who won in the pit yesterday. It's like no,
Hmm.
it took a lot more time and it wasn't as widespread. But yeah, it's like all these inaccuracies. It's like it's not like we're not trying to really nitpick them. I want to make sure that people get that clear. Like even with all of its flaws, I think that this story, the fact that they are trying to be as truthful as they can
Hmm.
for modern audiences, it inspires this interest in ancient Rome. It certainly does for me. And I think
Yeah.
creating that interest is important because the history of ancient Rome is important. We still talk about it today. We still see the impacts of Roman society today. And
Hmm.
it's crucial just for societal progress to reflect on the past.
Yeah. And you have to know some about Rome to tell the like white supremacist guys who are obsessed with ancient Rome how they're wrong, because that's
Yeah,
always um. But let's talk about some,
exactly.
yeah. Let's talk about some characters for a little bit. We have Lucius Maximus Aurelius, or Hanno, he's called for most of the movie as he's like under undercover, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think about Lucius,
Undercover.
the protagonist?
So I think that Mezcal, the actor, does a fantastic job with the role, does his
Hmm.
best, and it's a great performance through and through. And man, I do not want to fight that guy in a fight. I think he'll clobber me. I just
Hmm.
know it. But I think the character itself, I think it's a little underbaked, in my opinion. Like we've been
Yeah.
alluding to, I think that we could have had a little bit more reason to have an emotional connection with him.
Hmm.
Like I think even spending like five five more minutes at the start of the movie establishing him in the town and establishing some emotional connection with that area would
Hmm.
have given him a little bit more. but also I just think that his backstory is just too complicated, and it's like just unbelievable. It feels like a Shakespearean narrative, and it's just fucking ludicrous. Like, oh, I had to send my son away, and then he comes back 20 years later to save the day as the destined hero. It's like it just feels impossible to believe.
Yeah. Well, and like, not to just compare it to the original, but his his backstory is like, okay, he's the Prince of Rome. He's Marcus Aurelius, his grandson, and then he has to go on the run because he's a threat
Mm-hmm.
to someone as the heir, and then he just lives his whole fucking life, falls in love, and then he becomes an enemy of Rome because he's just fighting on the other side of a battle, and then he becomes a gladiator. Compare that to Maximus, the general who became a slave, the slave who became a gladiator, the gladiator who defied an emperor. Boom. That's it. It's so clean
Yeah.
right there. And it's and it plays out so well in the first part of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you, like the backstory of how he ended up in the situation, it just ultimately feels contrived to me. I think they wanted a next generation connection,
Yeah.
because that's the legacy sequel thing, right? And they felt like the kid from the first movie made the most sense, but then they had to come up with some convoluted way for him to become a gladiator because why would Lucilla's son become a gladiator when he's just a kid and he seems fine at the end of the last movie? Um, you know what would have worked, honestly? Lucius just growing up and being in the role of General Acacius, Pedro Pascal's character.
Mm.
That would have made perfect sense. He grows up in Roman society in the aftermath of Maximus's sacrifice, and the dream that Maximus died for is fading around him, and he's become more disillusioned with the empire. But
Mm-hmm.
he loses a battle at the start of the movie and finds himself opposed to a different character, a random guy that's a new character whose
Mm-hmm.
wife he kills in a battle at the beginning of the movie. Um, I that seems like a more clean way for that character
Yeah.
to be involved, and you could still have that legacy sequel thing, but now he's sort of the object of revenge this time, and that would have been an
Yeah.
dynamic. But well,
That is a good idea, though, because then you could spend. It could be entirely different in a way, because then you're spending a little bit more time focusing on like the politics of it
mm-hmm,
and the populace and how people are interacting at that level and how he like has to like work with the emperors
mm-hmm,
as Acacius and like as the son of Commodus slash Maximus and
yeah,
trying to navigate this legacy. But
mm-hmm,
then you don't spend as much time focusing like in the gladiatorial ring and like having to justify these interactions
yeah,
with the gladiator in a way. Hmm.
yeah. Or you
That's a good
focus
idea.
on that gladiator as your
Yeah.
protagonist, and you have a fresh new character who has no connection to the
Yes.
original movie as your protagonist, but you still have
Yes.
a connection to the first one. He's just in a more antagonistic role. But yeah, that's one way they could have gone about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And um, yeah, because I think I would have preferred a sequel, like I was saying earlier, that if it was a sequel to this movie that's set like 100 years or so after
Mm-hmm.
the original, closer to the collapse of the Roman Empire, I think that could have been more interesting to me personally. Like, blank slate, the words and actions of Maximus are a distant memory. Same with
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
Corruption is widespread. 100 years have passed. Things are totally different. The geography of the empire has changed too. Like that's a whole new set of characters, whole new kind of premise in a way, and having the protagonist not being related to Maximus, he can make his own path instead. I think that would have been
Mm-hmm.
more interesting to me than a direct sequel. And you could set it closer because I was looking up like what happened towards the end of the ancient Roman Empire, like because
Yeah.
Rome gets sacked multiple times in like 410, and then like 20 years later, and then like a third time or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of stuff with the Visigoths and stuff, but like What if it could have been set closer to that first sacking, and maybe the gladiators have a role in that sacking? Maybe there's like an uprising that she could play in there. Or
Yeah.
I also looked this up. The Gladiator games actually ended around that same time, a few
Mm.
years earlier, actually. So maybe that sacking story wouldn't have worked, but there was an emperor who, like, apparently said, no more of these games. Like,
Yeah.
he was convinced by someone being, like, stoned to death in the arena because that guy was against the games, and he just said, this is barbaric. We're getting
Hmm.
rid of this. That, I think, could have been a interesting story of, like, the gladiators all of a sudden being freed and not having to play these games anymore, but then like
Yeah.
also the politics with the emperor at the time. I think there are some interesting stories there towards the end
Hmm.
of Rome that would also mirror this original dream of Marcus Aurelius for Rome. And that's my own opinion. Maybe people disagree, but I think that would have been more interesting than just a direct sequel.
Yeah. Let's talk about General Acacius a little bit too. He's a pseudo antagonist, but also his own protagonist in a way because he's a decent guy. Pedro Pascal, love Pedro Pascal. He's good here, but the character ends up kind of playing a much smaller role than I expected. Um, I did not think he was going to be the main like guy that Paul
Yeah.
Mescal was trying to fight throughout the whole movie. I thought there was going to be some sort of twist on it, and I
Hmm.
actually liked that he was both a good person who's trying to do his best in a bad situation and the target of Lucius's vengeance just due to circumstance, right? And I also thought it was compelling how when Acacius is killed, essentially executed in the arena, um, how
Hmm.
Lucius calls this out. It's like, is this how Rome treats her heroes? Like, if they'll do this,
Yes.
what'll they do to you? And I think using that to incite a riot throughout Rome was really neat, and it took the movie into a different direction than the first movie went in, and that became
Hmm.
the most engaging part of the film for me was those riots and the chaos that ensues after that.
Yeah, yeah, and I like Acacius too. I agree. I love Pedro Pascal and just about anything he does. I think he's fantastic, but his character is more morally complex. You know,
Hmm.
he is kind of like Maximus in a lot of
Hmm.
ways because
Yeah.
he is this renowned general, and he's like, I've done my part for the empire. I just want to retire and just
Hmm.
live with my wife and you know just relax and get the life that I was afforded. And they're like, no, you do not get that. So
Yep.
I think that he felt a lot more like Maximus than
Hmm.
Lucius did.
Yeah, he's very much the Maximus analog, which does, make it interesting that he is an antagonistic figure here, at least from Lucius's perspective. And going
Hmm.
back to Lucius, I would say like one of the things that doesn't work about him for me is how seeming motivated by very little he switches how he feels about character.
Mm.
Like with his mother, when they first reunite, he lashes out at her, and then the next time they
Yeah.
see each other, he's like fine with her. And sure, that's to be expected in the storyline, but I thought there would be something that motivates that more. And same with
Yeah.
Acacius. Like, he wants to kill Acacius really bad, but then Acacius is like, I love your mom, and I loved Maximus. He was great. And then he doesn't want to kill Acacius anymore. And it's like, okay,
Hmm.
need a little bit more than that
I agree.
in this case. I did like the thing he says to Lucilla where it's like I couldn't see the man in him. I could only see like the object of my vengeance, right? And he's able to see the man at a certain point, but like let him interact more than
Yeah.
one to let that happen because they only interact, I think, when they fight, right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, it would have been like if Lucilla can come down to the cells, why can't Acacius? Why
Mm-hmm.
can't Acacius have a similar interaction where he comes down, tries to plead with him to accept his mother? You know, like
Yeah.
that could have brought them closer.
Have the prison break work for a while before they get caught or something. Have them interact there and, have to have each other's backs reluctantly. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, the ending, the riots, uprising, and a chaotic ending, I would say. I think the uprising, inspired by Acacius's execution, like I said, was one of the more gripping parts that the movie brings to the table. It was fresh, unique, and I liked Macrinus, who we have not talked about enough, using the chaos to turn the two emperors against each other and then just taking control. I thought his whole rise to power thing going on throughout the movie was really fun. I like how he keeps making bets against this obvious gambling addict senator,
Yeah.
where he owns his house at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And he was just so fun to watch, and his motivation, like, I didn't know what side the movie wanted me on for a little while, because it's like, oh yeah, Rome kind of fucking sucks right now. Maybe Rome should burn. Maybe this is really good ultimately. And then he just fucking shoots Lucilla in the chest. Senator Gracchus from the first movie gets his hands cut off and dies. And it felt so strangely mean-spirited. Like,
Yeah, it did.
it's not a problem necessarily, but I just don't know what the story was trying to tell me by killing off all these characters from the first film in such unceremonious ways, and a way that's not really lingered on very long. It's just like, oh, there they go, they're dead.
Yeah, right. They're just killed off really quick. It is a little confusing, and you're totally right. Though we haven't talked about Macrinus enough because he is, I think, one of the more fascinating characters of this movie. Because you're right. For a time, it's like, oh, he's like on Lucius's side, and he's trying to like. But you can see that he's got this other game going, and
Yeah.
over time we learn a little bit more about his backstory and how he was like his home was also like taken by Rome, and like he's been so fucked over by the Empire that at this point he's kind of a Joker character who's just like, I just want to see Rome burn because of
Yeah.
all the pain and suffering they've caused me, but he also kind of wants to, you know, be there and be the instrument for it. But yeah, he's a really cool character, and I honestly wish we got even more of him.
Yeah.
And Denzel, awesome work, awesome Denzel.
Oh yeah, he was amazing, and I think the way his character goes was one of the more creative riffs on the original movie, because, like you were saying, it seems like he's on Lucius's side at first, and it's like, oh, he's the Proximo of this movie. You know, he
Yes.
is a slave owner, and he bought the main character, but ultimately, like, they're gonna bond, and he's gonna help him out in some way. And it's like, no, it's a very different thing, and that was cool. I just liked how he's this like, you know, he portrays himself like this like amicable socialite to the other Romans, but secretly he's like building this house of cards to bring it all crumbling down. It was really engaging. It was the best part of the movie.
Yeah, for sure. I liked him a lot. And yeah, when I was doing research on him too, specifically, he was actually like, historically speaking, this guy Macrinus, he was kind of a soldier, an equestrian. So like he had more combat experience than the character presented in this film. But I like this depiction because he's, yeah, like you said, he's more of this socialite character, and
Yeah.
I liked seeing that side of Rome here.
Cool. All right. So, Gladiator 3.
I know.
What do you think?
Because I've been reading, and I've seen that they've started to work a little bit on this script. One article I saw, they were like, yeah, we're about 8 pages in, and no, just no, I'm not interested.
Yeah, no, I like. Yeah, I never thought Gladiator needed a sequel to begin with. Like,
Yeah.
I Ridley Scott's an amazing director. The Last Duel is fucking amazing, and it made no money. No one saw that fucking movie, and it's incredible. Napoleon was all right. It's better than this, I think. But like, I want to see Ridley Scott make more things like The Last Duel. Fresh, new ideas. I don't need this shit. I like let the
Yeah.
let the big studios make the franchise things until the end of time. Like Ridley Scott is like 86 or something. I want to see new, unique things. Like I would rather see something in the vein of a House of Gucci again instead of
Yes.
like I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
Gladiator is
Me
perfect.
too.
This is just it doesn't measure up to me. Um,
Yeah. You don't need to make another Gladiator movie to go back to Rome. Like
yeah.
that's just a fact. If you want to make another Rome movie about the ancient Roman Empire, there's so much to
Mm-hmm.
explore and there's so much source material. You do not need to go back to the Colosseum. You could do a whole ancient Rome movie that
Do
is
something about
just like,
Hannibal. Like,
yeah, something about Hannibal or like the conquest of like Carthage or just like
mm-hmm.
anything, like any of like the big wars or any of their conquests. Like there's you can do whatever you want. You don't have to go back to the ring.
You don't even need to make a gladiator movie to make a movie about gladiators. You could
Mm-hmm.
make a different thing about gladiators, and it could also be good. It's just
Exactly.
it just ultimately this movie rang very hollow. I had no real interest in it ahead of time, but the trailers got me kind of hyped. It looked really good because it does look really good, and it's
Yeah.
ultimately just fine. Like we aren't being that nice to this movie, but it's not a piece of shit or anything. It's fine. It's just hollow. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you'll have a good time if you watch it,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah, I would say like I'd recommend it for the spectacle. Go for the spectacle. It's
Yeah.
worth seeing
Yeah.
on the big screen. Um, but I'm probably never gonna watch it again. That's kind of where I land
Yeah.
on it. It's
Me
just
too.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's all right. But with that, let's hop into some other stuff. What do you got going on?
So, continuing to watch The Penguin, and yes, I will have watched it all in time for our next episode. I promise. I promise. But it is so good. It is fun. Um, yeah, it is such a fun series. I can't wait to talk about it with you
Mm-hmm.
on this show. Um, also, continuing to watch The Great British Bake Off, the new season. It's a lot of fun. It's always a good, like, just wholesome show. It's just fun. And
Yeah.
next week is the last episode of this season, which has me a little bummed. But and Dylan, you'll be excited about this. The guy that I'm rooting for in the show is
Mm-hmm.
named Dylan.
Oh my God. The
He's so
guy who
good.
helped me at the computer store today was also named Dylan. What is going on?
The Dylans of the world unite.
I probably shouldn't say stuff like that on our show. That's probably rude. Ignore that.
Yeah, whatever. Anyways, and one of the other shows we've been watching lately is Unsolved Mysteries, the new
Mm-hmm.
and the old ones. So like they have some new episodes on Netflix that they're releasing, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some good shit. There are some good episodes. Like we just watched one the other night. That's actually got some paranormal activity in it, where it's like these. It was actually Navajo Nation Rangers,
Hmm.
so like the own police force investigating some paranormal crimes, like sightings of
Cool.
Bigfoot and
Mm-hmm.
UFOs and skinwalkers, and it was creepy. It is so good. But we've also been rewatching some of the old ones on YouTube
Yeah.
from the 90s, and some of them are still unsolved, and they're crazy. Some of them are just fucking nuts. We're
Yeah.
just like cryptic messages, crazy stuff. I just love Unsolved Mysteries. It's so much fun. Um,
Cool.
and also continuing on with the Game of Thrones rewatch, last night we just watched the um, the episode where Daenerys gets the Unsullied army and turns them
Mm.
against their captors, which
Oh, that
is
episode's so good.
it's amazing. It's so vindicating, especially after she's been in that city for like 3 or 4 episodes, and the
Mm-hmm.
guy is just treating her like shit, and then she just turns around and speaks in High Valyrian to
Oh
him.
God.
It's like, oh, it's so vindicating.
The way like I don't know how to speak High Valyrian, obviously, but the way she says the like, what is this like? I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, like blah 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 blah. Like High Valyrian is my mother tongue. It's
Exactly. It's so good. Like she just like fucking kicks that guy into the dirt.
mm-hmm.
It's so much fun. But we watched the behind the episode
Mm-hmm.
for that, and one of the stupid producers he talked about he had this good quote actually because he said, "As Daenerys's circle of empathy grows, so
Mm-hmm.
does her circle of cruelty," which I thought was actually a pretty interesting quote because we keep seeing like in those first 2-3 seasons, as she's gaining more allies, she's also becoming increasingly cruel to the
Mm-hmm.
people who wrong her,
Yeah.
and she's not really getting checked for that in a way. Like, yeah, she turns the slaves on the slavers, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
great moment, but she basically just like wipes out the city and then moves on.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit, she's always been fucking cruel.
Yeah. Well, and
In
that's
a
a big
way.
part of the books too, because remember, like she goes from like city to city, and then like she doesn't really build any infrastructure to like maintain her new rule of law that she sets up. And then there's the like
Hmm.
revolution against her. Remember the siege of whichever city
Right.
she like lands in at where she stays for a long time. Um, yeah, no, that was a cool part of the, and I think that's such an interesting part of the story, and why like when Sir Barristan shows up eventually, and then ultimately Tyrion, it's like they're important advisors for her because like Jorah never checks her because he's in love with her and he doesn't want to do that. So he's a bad advisor in that way
Yeah.
because he's just like infatuated with her. Um,
Hmm. But yeah, like it's. I thought that was just like an interesting moment of realization. Like, oh yeah, she's always been
mhm.
kind of her father in a way, a mad
Yeah.
queen. But that's it for me right now. I'll keep you
Hmm.
guys updated on our Game of Thrones if I have any other unique insights that come
Yeah.
across my way. What have you been up to, Dylan?
So continuing to watch the Dandadan anime. I'm watching on Netflix, having a great time with it. It's very fun. Also reading the short stories in The Witcher: Sword of Destiny. I'm almost at the end of the one with the like golden dragon. That was one of the TV show episodes. In
Right.
like, the last sequence of that one, and yeah, I really like The Witcher short stories. The novels didn't really do it for me, but every short story I've read so far from The Witcher, it's like, yeah, this guy's style just works best in short stories. The novels become very meandering, and the
Mm.
show, I think, is inconsistent at best. I still maintain the games are my favorite iteration of The
Yeah.
Witcher, but you know. Also, I was very lucky to realize that Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2 actually was playing at one theater
Mm.
in Denver. Apparently, it's only playing in like 50 theaters in the country. So I went down and
Oh
I saw it
wow.
yesterday afternoon. Do you know what this movie is at all?
No, not really. No.
Okay, so it stars Nicholas Holt. There are a bunch of other people in it as well, but basically he gets selected for jury duty on a murder trial, and very quickly he realizes that he was actually the person who killed this woman, and it is about his moral quandary of what to do about that. Because it's like
Wow.
yeah, because it's like he is married and has a baby on the way, and it was an accident, but an innocent man who is also like not a very good guy is
Mm-hmm.
away for like a really long time for this murder, and he has to, you know, decide what to do. It's really good. It's a really good like legal moral
Wow.
thriller. Um, yeah. If you have a chance to catch
Okay,
it,
I want to watch that now.
yeah, it's playing at the AMC Highlands Ranch, and I think that's the only theater in Denver that has it. So if you want to trek 35 minutes, do it. Also, as I said earlier, I rewatched the first Gladiator earlier last week before we saw the new one. It holds up so well. It's just so good.
Nice.
Um, and then last
Hell
but not
yeah.
least, as of as of recording last night, the final 3 episodes of Arcane aired, and I have finished the season and the show. I love this show so much. There are some problems with pacing, I suppose, in season 2, but overall, it's just I think it's a very special show. I think we're going to talk about it as our last episode of the year after the Penguin episode. And I wait to talk about it. I loved the episode we did on the first season. If you all are listening and want to go back and check that out, it's from when that show first came out. But I think it wraps up the storylines of most of its core characters very, very well. And also the animation is so good. It's awesome. But
That's awesome. I'm going to get around to it. I do. I'm going to watch that show, and we will talk about it. I promise.
all right. But that is going to do it for us this week. We'll be back for the Penguin in 2 weeks. Thanksgiving week is this week, so if you're listening to this on Wednesday or Thursday, have a happy Thanksgiving if that is something you celebrate. Until next time, Niles, where can people find you online?
On Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. What about you, Dylan? Where can people follow you online?
On Instagram at DylanD1026, on Twitter at D-Day Movies, on YouTube at D-Day Movies. You can also find both of us here at Play, Pause, Rewind on your podcast platform of choice, as well as YouTube. And on YouTube, we also have our second channel, Play, Pause, Rewind Videos. We have a TikTok as well that we'll get back to updating eventually when time is once again available to us. All of that is linked in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please leave a 5-star review if you liked the show. Share it with your friends and family. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.